Blessed is our God at all times, both now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. O strange wonder, great and marvelous, for the fount of life is laid within a sepulchre. A ladder to heaven's heights doth the small grave become. Be glad, O Gethsemane, the sanctuary of her that gave birth to God. Ye faithful, let us cry out, possessing as our commander great Gabriel. Maiden full of grace, rejoice thou. With thee is the Lord our God, who abundantly granteth his great mercy to the world through thee. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Father. Father Hezekiah Carnazzo is our founding executive director. My name is Peter Tapsack, and it's a joy to welcome you to be with us tonight. Our speaker this evening is a priest in the Melkite Catholic Church of America and pastor of St. Elias Melkite Parish in San Jose, California. Father Sebastian Carnazzo earned his Ph.D. in Biblical Studies at the Catholic University of America and has taught at Our Lady of Guadalupe Seminary of the Fraternity of St. Peter, St. Patrick's Seminary of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, and Christendom College, and continues to teach biblical studies and catechetics for a number of institutions. His dissertation was published under the title Seeing Blood and Water, a narrative critical study of John 1934. He is also the author of many articles and a contributor to a number of multi-author works, including the Great Adventure Bible of Ascension Press. He is a frequent lecturer for the ICC, as well as a beloved teacher of scripture in our Magdala apostolate. Please welcome back to the Institute, Father Sebastian Carnazzo.
Father Sebastian, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Father Hezekiah. It's great to be here.
Great to have you with us. And the evening's all yours.
St. Jerome said this: they will to be at the same time Jews and Christians, but are neither Jews nor Christians. They will to be at the same time Jews and Christians, but at the same time are neither Jews nor Christians. St. Jerome was writing that around the year 400. Okay? He was speaking of Christians in his time. These were the Nazarenes. Nothing to do with first century reference to the Nazarenes and the Acts of the Apostles. This is a group of Christians in his era who began to Judaize. Now, what does Judaize mean? We dealt with this in other classes. Judaize means to begin to accumulate, be attracted to various customs and things from Judaism. It's not a negative term or anything like that. I mean, people might use it that way, but it's not negative. To Judaize, to be a Judaizer in a general sense, means simply just be attracted to various things of Judaism. It's okay. A sympathizer of various types of a culture, a world. Lots of people do these things with, maybe someone's likes Italian culture and begins to go to Italian restaurants and learn Italian language and whatever, and go to Italy, even though they have no Italian background to them. Okay. All right. So an Italianizer in a certain sense. Okay. So there have been throughout the history of Christianity for the last 2,000 years, groups, individuals and groups who have moved in a Judaizing direction in various degrees, various theological reasons, political reasons, all sorts of things. We already talked about in detail in the other classes, the first century Judaizers. If you don't know who they are, what was going on, what Paul what Paul condemned in Romans and Galatians, what the apostles condemned in Acts chapter 15, then you really want to go research that. But the Judaizers of the first century are not the same as modern Messianic Judaism. There is a lot of exterior similarities, but there are some differences. A lot of differences at the heart. So, and that's what we're going to talk about here now. And so we already talked about the Judaizer heresy and that whole tendency that somehow you cannot be saved unless you're circumcised and keeping kosher. Yes, Jesus is essential, but you must be circumcised to keep kosher in order to be saved. That's the Judaizer heresy of the first century. We dealt with that in great detail. Paul condemned it. The apostles condemned it. That's not to be confused with modern Messianic Judaism. That is a totally different situation, though exteriorly it may look like that. Okay? All right, so now, as I mentioned, from then, and then also now until today, there have been various movements. So a modern Messianic Jew should not in any way think that, hey, this is a new idea. This is actually something that's kind of popular, sometimes said among some of the groups, not all of them, but some of them, that this is a new movement of the Spirit, that this is preparing for the end times, that this is a sign that that what Paul said in Romans is now coming, to fruition. That now finally those branches that were cut off are now being grafted back in, and that this is now a sign that we're coming to the great eschatological moment. That's the Protestant undergirding there, and we'll talk about it in a second. But that is that idea that somehow this is a great, unique moment is not historically accurate. There have been, since the time of the apostles until today, various movements in each century that have moved in these directions. There is certainly a concentration in the first 3 centuries, tapering off by the time you get to Jerome. By the time you get to, 5th century, 6th century, basically these things tend to disappear for the most part. You see a little bit of of this in the Middle Ages. And then for the most part, you don't see much until the modern era in the last 2 centuries. And what we call Messianic Judaism today is really something in this last century, something that most historians would say, as we know it, is something since the 60s. Though there are certainly things that may have brought it about even 50 to 100 years earlier. So you certainly have a concentration of this earlier, and then in the first couple centuries, and then now here at this moment, we're seeing a little bit more of a development. But this has been throughout the history of the church in various ways. Okay, now, Messianic Judaism, our primary topic tonight. What is it? And whom do they attract? And that's helpful to understand what it is. And again, this is not in any way, please, if any of you know someone who's involved in this, or someone who, or you yourself is involved in this is no way, please, some sort of an attack upon them or anything like this. But we really need to understand these things. So, modern Messianic congregations, Messianic Jewish congregations, if you want to call them these things. You've heard me say 1,000 times in my lectures previous to this. When it comes up, I will say, and I know this will be offensive to some, but this is the interpretation of everyone involved in this, except for the Messianic Jews, is that Messianic Judaism is neither Messianic nor Jewish, is neither Messianic nor Judaism, and that I will tonight. Of course, I've said that a million times that we should have a whole lecture on this tonight. We're going to talk a little bit more about how that works and some of the extremes in that situation. So if we look at the average Messianic congregation, the average one, they are typically very small. If you know of anyone that's involved in one of these congregations, you're talking sometimes a congregation of 5, 10 people, sometimes 30 people, 40, 50. They tend to be very small. You will find some congregations that are larger, in the hundreds. But on average, in my experience and study, Messianic congregations tend to be very small. That is not there's not something wrong with that. Nothing, that's not negative. In Eastern Christian congregations in America, our churches tend to be very small. I got 30, 40, 50 people on a Sunday sometimes. Okay? So nothing wrong with that. Jesus started with 12. So, but just be aware, we're talking about just kind of the nature of the situation. So they tend to be very small congregations on average compared to general Christian congregations. They also tend to be, on average, we're talking somewhere in the range of 75 to maybe 80%, 85%. I haven't seen official statistics on this. Former Protestants. So if you go and look at a average Messianic congregation, now you may be listening in saying, well, that's not my congregation. Well, you may not be in an average congregation, and that's good. That's okay. However, what we need to be is statistically aware. So if you go and ask the average Messianic Jew who identifies himself that way, what is your religious background? On average and above average, 75, 80, 85%, somewhere in there, they were former Protestants. I mean, that's a fact. So again, I can't give the specific, I don't know if anyone's done official statistics on this, but just check it out. Check it out for yourself. Make some phone calls. Okay. And you will find that on average, in general, therefore, when you get into these congregations, you will find this. And there is a wide spectrum here. Okay. So, ask, someone about in Protestantism in general, or just say Christianity in general, the variety of forms of Christianity today. What about the variety of Presbyterianism? Presbyterians refer to themselves as the split peas. You ever heard that? I got that from Presbyterians. They told me that. So, because there are so many different kinds of Presbyterians. There are extremely conservative Presbyterians, and there are those that are not. You have strict Calvinists who listen to R.C. Sproul and John MacArthur every 5 minutes, and you've got Presbyterians waving rainbow flags out the front of their church. Okay, it's very different. And they all say Presbyterian out in the front. You say, well, it's Presbyterian. You have very different congregations, different unions of Presbyterians, etc. So in Christianity in general, it's a huge swath of variety and diversity. Think of the swath and variety of Judaism. Think of the swath of have you been to Jerusalem? Have you seen the different hats? Okay, so think of in America, we often say Orthodox, conservative, and Reformed. Well, even each one of those groups encompasses a massive variety of ideas and perspectives, right? And the same goes with Islam or Hinduism. Okay, we can go on. So what I'm saying right now, please understand that when I'm talking about Messianic Judaism here, we're talking about in general terms. And I'm going to start on one end of the spectrum and move to the other end. These are general terms. You may know somebody who is involved in a congregation that is somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, or way at one end or the other, or somewhere, mixing the thing. And if you are part of something like that and you're listening in tonight, understand that we're talking about a spectrum. Okay, there's a spectrum out there. And if you're involved in that, you certainly know what I'm talking about. So be honest. Okay, so on one far end of the spectrum, we're going to start at what I would call the Christian end of the spectrum. Because all Jews will tell you, any serious Jew of any serious congregation, I don't care what form, will tell you that Messianic Judaism is not Jewish. That's a fact. As far as an official statement from these organizations. And you will find among probably the vast majority of Christian bodies that Messianic Judaism is not truly Christian. But I'm going to tell you there's something, it's a little more subtle than that. In fact, a lot more subtle than that. And that at one far end of the spectrum, you have congregations that I would say are fully Christian. And you have congregations at the other end of the spectrum that are in many ways fully Jewish. And you have a massive mix in between. Again, so we don't want to overgeneralize this. Okay? Okay, so we're going to start with the far one end of the spectrum, and that is this. You will find on this end of the spectrum, this is the Christian end of the spectrum, congregations in which the pastor likes to be called rabbi. He may wear a yarmulke at the service on Sunday. He may like to say a few Hebrew words here or there during his homily, his sermon. He may say shalom when he greets you. He might start with a prayer in Hebrew. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. So he might say something in Hebrew. He may, the church might be called a synagogue. Synagogue is just a Greek word, synagogi. It's a Greek word, by the way, not Hebrew or Aramaic, it's Greek. Synagogi means gathering. Perfectly fine. You want to call it a church or synagogue? I don't care what you want to call it in English. It's a gathering place. Okay. And what you have here in this case is a veneer of Judaism. It's simply skin deep and very spotty often. And it's reflective of the pastor himself to the degree that he is involved in this, or his research or study or background. Okay, so what you find these congregations, these small congregations, is that what's going on in that congregation, the language being used, what's being taught, is extremely dependent upon that pastor and his background, his research, his knowledge of Hebrew, Aramaic, his knowledge of biblical studies, his interest in all this stuff. Okay, so the on that far end of the spectrum, like I said, what you're dealing with here is a veneer of Judaizing. I'm not using the word there in a negative way by any means. An interest in Jewish culture, Jewish words, Hebrew, Aramaic, Jewish language, Jewishness. And, but if you lift the hood and you look at what's going on underneath, you find that you are dealing with simply evangelical Christianity. Yes, the pastor was a yarmulke. Yes, he likes to go by the name rabbi. Okay, whatever, who cares? What does it matter? Okay, he likes to call his church a synagogue instead of a church. Okay, fine, whatever. It's just English stuff. It doesn't matter. He might like to refer to Jesus as Yeshua. Who cares? It's Aramaic versus English. Whatever. I don't know why he didn't speak the rest of the language in English or in Aramaic if he's going to do that. But anyway, it's fine. I mean, in my lectures, I will sometimes, you guys have heard me refer to a particular individual using the proper Greek pronunciation or the Hebrew pronunciation or something. Not because I have a theological bent on it, it's just because I've gotten used to that because of what I'm doing in my studies. Okay, so Moses, I usually call him Moses because it's Moshe if you want to really get into it, but it doesn't really matter. He who was drawn from the water, right? Nicodemus. People say Nicodemus. Okay, it's fine if you want to call it. I don't care. But Nicodemus is a Greek word, and because my Greek studies, I like to hear, when I'm saying I like to hear the meaning there because it means something to me. But whatever. So Yeshua, Yehoshua, the Hebrew version, or Jesus, or Jesus, I don't care, whatever you want. Okay. But so that doesn't really matter too much. In a sense, I would say from my perspective, when I hear someone doing these things, the question is, why are they doing it? Is a good question to ask. And it's simply, I want to get authentic. I want to get attached to the first century. I want to learn more about first century Christianity. Oh, we're buddies then. You and I, we're buddies. Okay, because I'm on that same team. All right. So now, what else here before we move on to the next section here? So yeah, okay. So in general, if you walk into one of these congregations on the far one end of the spectrum, what I call the Christian end of the spectrum, that is, if you lift the hood, right? If you get under the skin, you are dealing with standard evangelical Christianity in all of its doctrines. They're teaching the solas, sola fide, sola scriptura. They're teaching in solus gratia, if you want the three solas. Okay, they're teaching basic, authentic Trinitarian doctrine about the nature of God. Okay, they're and therefore the nature of Jesus, God and man. Okay, so it's fully Christian in a sense. The sola part has Protestant edge, but fine. Okay, still Christian. And then a minimalism of the sacraments that you find in evangelical Christianity. Okay, so you might get baptism, you might get a Lord's Supper once a year or something like that, or 4 times a year, whatever. It's just exact same stuff you're going to get in your typical evangelical or fundamentalist church as far as sacramentalism, the minimalism of sacramentalism, and the understanding of it, of course, not only the practice and understanding of it, the doctrines, the essential doctrines, the same doctrines you're going to get there on Trinitarian doctrines and the incarnation, nature of Jesus, true God, true man. And then also, of course, the Protestant solas. Okay. So really, when you throw the hood back down, you're dealing with evangelical Christianity with a veneer of Judaism on it. That is truly Christian. Now, I would say that anyone in that situation needs to be reading the early church writings. Okay, you need to read the New Testament maybe another couple times, especially Acts, and then also needs to certainly be reading the first couple centuries of Christian writings. Okay, because the Bible that we have, okay, our Bible didn't just drop out of the sky here 2,000 years later. Okay, this was collected, discerned by, read by, ordered by, and used in Sunday services by Christians in the first couple centuries. And that's why our Bible is ordered in the order in which it exists. The books themselves, not in their collection, but the order in which your New Testament exists is due to liturgical use of the first 3 centuries of Christianity. Okay, so if you say, oh, I don't need them, I just need my Bible. Okay, well, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, that's completely irrational. So what you need to do is go look and see who were these people that gave you a Bible. What did they say? What did they believe? And that might help us understand the book they gave to us. Okay. And don't forget, the faith is incarnate, right? It's incarnate. Okay. So now, next step, moving toward the middle of the spectrum now. You will find Messianic congregations that have taken the next step. And that is, they are no longer meeting on Sundays, but rather on Saturday. Why would they do this? Well, it'd be helpful for them to research the history of the Adventist movement in America and the Baptist movement and the groups that broke off of them, called the Seventh-day Baptists and the Seventh-day Adventists. And they should know the history of these movements, the Baptists in England, and where the Sabbath keeping began among the Baptists in England and why, and how it goes back to Luther in Germany and his Reformation and his misuse of the 10 Commandments in his catechesis. So most people have no idea this history, but are in one of these, they're in a Seventh-day Baptist church or they're a Seventh-day Adventist church. They have no idea where it's all coming, why they're doing what they're doing. Well, they need to know the history. Okay, Seventh-day Adventists picked up Sabbath keeping from the Seventh-day Baptists. The Seventh-day Baptists, a subset of the Baptists, got this idea from some of the Baptists in England in the English Reformation. When they picked up Luther's catechism, okay, here's Luther's small catechism. I happen to have these funny things on my desk. Okay, so if you guys could see my desk, you'd laugh. So Luther in his catechism took a new turn in catechesis in which he said, we don't need the Bible. I know this seems ironic, but we don't need the Bible to catechize people. What we need is the 10 Commandments. So he took what was the first stage of catechesis for the first 1,500 years of catechizing someone. And he took the Bible out of that and put the 10 Commandments in that spot. Father Sebastian, you're crazy. I'm not. Just go do the research on history of catechesis. Luther is the first one to create a catechism, his large and small, in which he bound together in his mind what was essential Christian doctrine for someone to know. And guess what? The Bible wasn't part of that. This shouldn't surprise you, knowing that he excluded 7 books from the Old and 7 books from the Testament. Not only the Old, but from the New. Thank God his followers put the new ones back in. Okay. So it's his misuse of the 10 Commandments from the Old Covenant and his misappropriation of the command on the Sabbath that eventually sparked the Sabbath keepers of England. Peter, we're going to have a whole lecture on this. Anyway, that is stage 2. You will find Messianic congregations in which they've gone to the next stage. And that is they are no longer meet on Sundays or meet on Saturdays. And this is going to be due primarily to influences from Seventh-day Adventism or Seventh-day Baptism. And so I said, well, no, that's not what happened in my congregation. My rabbi, no, he doesn't. Okay, trust me. There's only one way this stuff comes in, because it's a complete misreading of the Old and New Testament on this topic. And it came from the English Baptists to America. You can trace the whole thing from a history of religion standpoint. So, and this is, by the way, a section of, this is stage 2, that attracts Seventh-day Adventists. Seventh-day Adventists are often frustrated with their Seventh-day Adventism because it's only gone so far. It's still Protestant in its feel and everything. Its hymns are all written by Ellen G. White. It's so American. It doesn't have a real authentic Middle Eastern feel. And so Seventh-day Adventists will sometimes be attracted to a Messianic congregation, which is what we call here stage 2, in which they are not only doing the yarmulke and the gefilte fish and the whole stuff, they got the skin there, but they've also ditched Sunday and moved to Saturday. And they're also no longer eating pork. Seventh-day Adventists are attracted to this stage. They're not attracted to stage 1. For them, like, you guys aren't serious. Stage 2, oh yeah. And so you will find among the Protestants who are in stage 2 congregations, there will be a good number of them that come out of Seventh-day Adventism. And for good reason. I'll give you a quick 1-second story about a friend of mine. We'll call him Joe, who was a former Roman Catholic. He became Seventh-day Adventist. And we started having Bible studies together. He wanted to have Bible studies. Okay, so we started having them. We studied together for about a year or so, became really good friends. And at one point, he realized that there was a problem. His Seventh-day Adventist pastor didn't know any Hebrew or Aramaic, and he knew my Ph.D. and my background. So he said, so he brought to one of the Bible studies a prayer shawl. Sebastian, can you help me with something? What is it? So he pulls out of his bag this prayer shawl. I said, oh, it's like stripes and Hebrew writing on it. Oh, where'd you get that? He said, I ordered offline. Okay, why'd you do that? Well, because you put it over your head and you pray, and I'll tell you what, man. Okay, Joe. So what did you bring it to the Bible study night for? Because my pastor can't read Hebrew. Can you tell me what it says on it? Okay. So we laid it out on the dining room table, and I read it for him. I can't remember. This was 20 years ago or something. But it said something like, Jesus, the Messiah, King of Israel or something. I can't remember what it was. It was very nice, beautiful Hebrew and everything. Okay. So I gave it back to him. I said, what are you doing with it? He said, well, at night I put it on my head when I pray, I go in my room. Jesus said, go in your quiet room. So I go in my room quietly. I put it on my head, and I pray. I said, oh, okay, all right. Ready for the Bible study? Okay, so we open up our Bibles. Okay, so he is a guy who Joe was already, as a Seventh-day Adventist, being attracted to some of this stuff, watching a Messianic Jewish preacher on TV. I asked him, where'd you learn? Where'd you order this? Where'd this come from? He was on TV, flipping through channels, Messianic preacher on TV, and he's like, oh, prayer shawl, cool. Click. As a Seventh-day Adventist, this was attractive because he's already doing Sabbath keeping and no pork. So, hey, this looks more realistic. I understand that yearning. You guys know me. When it comes to first century Christianity, I'm what they call fascist. Okay. And I mean that in a good way. At least I think in a good way. I mean, what was the first couple centuries? What were the early Christians doing? That's what we need to be doing. But tragedy today, 99% of Christians have no idea what the first couple centuries of Christians that gave us the Bible, who they were, what they said, or what their names were. That's what we need to be looking at. Okay. Now, that's stage 2. You can see where this is going. Now we're going to fly toward the end because it would take us, and Peter would kill me, another 5 hours to talk about all of the stages. And you can't really break these up because there's no congregation, you say, is in stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5. Everyone's there, but they're all reflective in one way or another of their pastor's stage. What is the pastor into at this moment? And you will often see a progression, by the way, from one end to the other spectrum. Okay. Either the pastor's moving in that direction or someone's church hopping, Messianic Jewish congregation hopping in that direction. There is an attraction to this. And this is why it's important to talk to the person who's involved in this, because they have to be aware of these stages wherever their pastor is or they themselves are. Sometimes the pastor's not moving fast enough. Hey, pastor, how come you say we can eat pork and the congregation down the street or on the other side, they say no pork. Leviticus says no pork. Well, because you see in the New Testament, don't give me that New Testament stuff. Okay, so then they hop to the next one. Or maybe the pastor is the one who's driving the movement and the congregation's kind of trying to trail behind. Hey, pastor, you sure about that? I've done my study. Okay, so it's either the pastor is driving it, and these congregations tend to move if you watch them, or the congregation, the individuals themselves will sometimes hop in this direction that we're going now. We're going to fly now to the very other end of the spectrum so you can understand how important this is. I am going to tell you about Messianic Jewish congregations right now that identify themselves as Messianic Jewish congregations and hold to ideas and beliefs that are very different from what we just talked about at the far end of the spectrum. Now we're at the far other end of the spectrum, and these are congregations that if you go on Google and say Messianic congregation near me, you will find some of these. But you have to ask the pastor, go attend it on it. And the guy, by the way, this is going to be on a Saturday now, okay? So they're going to be meeting on a Saturday. No way they're going to be meeting on a Sunday. This is the other end of the spectrum, okay? You got this? So we're at the other end of the spectrum here. They're on a Saturday. They're not on a Sunday. In fact, if you mention Sunday, they're going to be very apologetic against it. That Sunday is a late Christian invention. They're going to give you Seventh-day Adventist Constantine stuff, which is really funny from a historical standpoint. But there's more to it, and it's not just Saturday versus Sunday, because Seventh-day Adventists, we had a whole talk on it by the way, if any of you know Seventh-day Adventists, or this thing's, wait, what's that? There was a whole lecture we did 2 hours long on Seventh-day Adventism. And my brother and I did another one too on Kingdom of the Cults. Anyway, so at the other end of the spectrum now, and again, if you know someone who says, I'm a Messianic Jew, or someone's listening in right now who's a Messianic Jew, please understand that you are somewhere in the spectrum. So what I'm about to say, don't say, oh, that's not what I believe. Okay, I understand that. But there are Messianic congregations that hold to this seriously, what I'm about to tell you. And this is the other end of the spectrum, far, far other end. Identifying themselves as Messianic Jewish congregations. God is one. Fine. Obviously. Yes. Right? Shema Israel. We know the Shema, right? We know the whole thing. Okay. God is one. But is there a Trinity? On the far end of the spectrum? No. Now, you may know Messianic Jews say, no, I believe in the Trinity. Okay, that's your congregation. Okay. But the far end of the spectrum, if you don't already know this, you better know this. That there are Messianic congregations who deny the Trinity. That there is no Trinity. There is one God, and there is absolute oneness, and there are not three persons in one God. Okay, at that point, you are no longer dealing with Christianity. And I don't mean in a moral, ethical sense here, okay? Jehovah's Witnesses are not Christians, but they are some of the nicest people you will ever meet. I saw some today. Nice people. Very nice people. Hindus are nice people. Buddhists are nice people, okay? So when I say the word Christian, we say, oh, be a good Christian. We'll use that in a different sense, right? Sometimes, but when I'm talking theologically here, if someone denies the Trinity, the three persons in one God, you cannot, that is no longer a Christian religion. That's no longer part of the Christian religion, okay? 2, who is Jesus? All Messianic Jews, from the Christian perspective, all the way to the end, this other side, will tell you that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah, the anointed King of the Jews. We have done thousands of hours on that, so I can't do it right now. Okay? The Son of David, long-awaited return of the Messiah of the line of David. They will all agree on that. That's why it's called Messianic. But who is Jesus? And again, this is on this far end of the spectrum, and there's a huge number of stages in between. Jesus is divine? No, Jesus is not divine, but he was the Messiah. And Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah, the anointed King of the line of David. He is like David, Hezekiah, Josiah. The only difference is he was the last and greatest one, and the one prophesied by the prophets to come as the final great Messiah of the line of David. And of course, accomplished great things, for the people of God. That's on that far end of the spectrum. And if you deny this, you go do it. You call 10 Messianic congregations right now, and you call them, and you will find either a pastor who will tell you that, or he'll tell you about a pastor he knows that will tell you that. I challenge you. Okay? Now, 3. Those on this far in the spectrum will tell you that Jesus taught that the Torah is still in force. Still in force. That Jesus kept the Torah, his apostles kept the Torah, and that it is absolutely still in force. You won't hear that so much at the other end of the spectrum, where they'll say things as like, Jesus fulfilled the Torah, but Jesus lived the Torah, and so we live the Torah, but not to save ourselves. Okay? A Judaizer from the first century would say you do that to save yourself. The Christian on the far end of that spectrum where we started at does not believe the Torah is essential for salvation, but believes that this is what God expects of us, and we should do what God expects because this is what he told us to do. That's kind of thing. Very different from the Judaizers of the first century. But when we get to this other end of the spectrum, the Torah is absolutely in force, is absolutely essential, and God expects it of you. Okay. 4, and this is going to scare you. Well, I guess you're not scared yet. You won't be scared. That there are parts of the New Testament that are not inspired. I came upon this one time, okay, with my Seventh-day Adventist friend. We hit Colossians chapter 2, where Paul clearly says, and I had him read it in his own Bible, that the annual feasts, the monthly feasts, and the weekly feast, the Sabbaths, the three stages. Shadow of the past, but are fulfilled in Christ. I said, what do you think about that, Joe? You read it. It's in your Bible. I don't agree with that. How can you not agree with that? We're Christians, aren't we? We're like, I mean, you know, we got the same little playground here. It's called the New Testament. There's the borders of the playing field. There are some places where Paul is wrong. Really? How? I had never experienced this before. I eventually met another Seventh-day Adventist that told me this too. He said, we have what we call a dirty New Testament, in which there are good things and clean things, but there are unclean things. Things that Paul taught that were contrary to Moses. I asked Joe, I said, Joe, how do you know when Paul's wrong? He said, well, when Moses said something and Paul says the opposite, then Paul loses. Moses is right. Paul's wrong. That's a passage of Paul that's uninspired. And so you will find at this far end of the spectrum, various degrees of doubting the inspiration and authority of the New Testament, particularly Pauline epistles. Again, you might say, I have a Messianic Jewish friend. They read their Bible. Okay. Well, I don't know what spectrum they're on, but if you ask them to be honest with you, and if they've done their research on this movement, they may know of, or if they don't, they'd better do their research of congregations that hold to this and use the exact same title for their congregation, Messianic Jewish Congregation. This is not Father Sebastian's opinion here, what I'm giving you tonight, nor what I'm going to give you right now. And again, this is why, again, if there's anyone listening in who's a Messianic Jew, identifies himself as that, I would say identify yourself as a Christian, okay? But if you call yourself a Presbyterian or a Messianic Jew or a Roman Catholic, or whatever, first of all, you're a Christian. Let's first start there. That's what's essential. Let's start there as our foundation. But what I'm about to say can be quite offensive, but it's the facts, okay? And that is, what is Messianic Judaism? As I said, it really depends on what you're talking about of a congregation. Like, let me talk to the pastor. Let me talk to the members, what's being taught there. And let's see where they are on the spectrum, because they may be at one far in the spectrum where you'd say they're evangelical Protestants. Okay. I got some problems with evangelical Protestantism, but okay, whatever. It's still Christian. But they might also be way at the other end of the spectrum or somewhere in between. And so it's very important to make sure we know what we're talking about here. When we hear Messianic Jew, I'm a Christian. Okay, what does that mean? I'm a Jew. What does that mean? If you've been to Jerusalem, you know what I mean by that question. Okay. I'm a Muslim. You know Muslims. Okay. Lots of variety there. Hindus, etc. Okay. So when it comes to this question, please, again, be understanding of how careful we have to be in understanding that each congregation itself is somewhere in the spectrum in some way or another. And the pastor might be slightly ahead or behind the elders or something in this regard. But you can usually put them somewhere in the spectrum, somewhere in this broad spectrum. Great diversity of practices and beliefs on that spectrum. If you ask any organized body of Orthodox Jews, any organized body, official voice of conservative Jews, any organized body of Reformed Jews. I'm talking about organized here, not some random person who says something. Especially when we get to the Reformed area. Who knows what you're going to hear? Half of them are Unitarians. You will never find that I know of an official statement from conservative organized bodies, Orthodox, conservative, or Reformed. Again, Reformed is very fuzzy when it gets all the way into universal Unitarianism in many ways, that identifies or accepts Messianic Judaism as an authentic form of Judaism. And that, I believe, is very hard for a Messianic Jew to accept. but they all know it. They can't walk down to the local synagogue and feel like they're accepted as a Jew. It's not going to happen. That's a fact. What about the Christian perspective? Any apostolic church, Greek Orthodox, Coptic Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Melkite, Ukrainian Catholic, whatever you want. Any apostolic Christian group will not identify Messianic Judaism as authentic Christianity, but rather an aberrant form of Christianity of some degree of Protestantism with some form of Judaizing involved. This is the fact. You can make the phone calls, okay? In Protestantism, because there's a vast variety among them, there are somewhere over, I don't know, what is it now, up to like 60,000 different denominations, growing exponentially by the day. You will certainly find among the evangelicals, you'll find among some of the Protestants who will identify Messianic Judaism as a form of Christianity. And I agree with them, as long as we're talking about one end of the spectrum and the various degrees there. But if you're talking about the other end of the spectrum, no. And so this is where the word, that title Messianic Judaism is very dangerous, and that's being used in ways today by many different groups, different congregations, that all on the surface look very similar. When you lift the hood, you find some very, very, very different ideas.
Thank you very much for an excellent talk, very enlightening and nuanced. It's really interesting, to see the full spectrum that you described, and of course, very tricky, the situation that we find ourselves in where they share the same name. So navigating this, you really do have to ask the questions and probe into those beliefs. And so thank you for giving us the tools. Very helpful. Very helpful. Of course, we've got to talk about Seders this evening. We've gotten a couple of questions along those lines. I'll open it up a little bit. This person writes, for example, I've attended a Passover dinner at the parish. Once I went to a New Year's celebration at a synagogue, simply because I wanted to understand what Jesus participated in. Was that inappropriate? Could you comment on, some of these various practices like Seder meals, Passover meals, New Year's celebrations, other Jewish feasts and holidays?
Sure. Yeah. So, okay. So I think this is a very interesting thing to do for a social, cultural, kind of educational kind of endeavor. I wouldn't be doing it in a parish, but if you want to go visit your local synagogue or you want to go visit, you got a Jewish neighbor or something and they're celebrating something, yeah, go check it out. That sounds like fun. Sounds educational. Great. But please don't think that somehow you're going to be learning about first century Judaism. And that is the error that most people make. And again, someone's listening and saying, well, what do you mean by that? Okay. Have you been to a local Baptist congregation on a Sunday? Do you think you're attending a first century service? No. Okay. In fact, and this is something we didn't have time to get into, but there have been there's a massive wave of Protestant ministers, just general Protestants, but Protestant ministers, because these guys are really dealing with stuff, like seriously thinking about it on a weekly basis, especially on Monday when they're starting to prepare for their next Sunday, homily. They start to ponder, are what we doing on Sunday what first century Christians were doing? And in general, Christians are just like, yeah, they show up on Sunday, like, yeah, this is what we do. It's very simple. First century Christianity was very simple, and this is what we do. Okay. What about the guitars? No, electric guitar? No. Yeah, but aside from the guitars on the stage, of course. Okay. But what happens is these Protestant ministers start researching. First of all, they come to the discovery that nowhere in the Bible and the Bible alone does the Bible and the Bible alone teach the Bible and the Bible alone. That's the first one. Bing, light turns on. Okay, so nowhere in the Bible and the Bible alone does the Bible alone teach the Bible and the Bible alone. So wait a minute. Hold on. So I better go back and find out what the early Christians taught. if I'm going to be able to read my Bible and understand it, these are Protestant ministers who come to these conclusions. They're desperate. They got to teach, and they want to make sure they're not just teaching their opinions or their interpretations of a text. What do the early Christians understand about this text? So they go back and they start reading the apostolic fathers. And then they end up typically reading the next century of fathers and the next century of fathers. And they start devouring and saying, whoa, okay, Christians didn't show up suddenly at the Reformation. Wow, okay, our Bible didn't drop out of the sky. Okay. And then they start thinking historically. To quote Cardinal Newman, who went down the same path, right? He's researching the history of Christian doctrine. How do we know what we teach is authentic? How do we get to where we are? Is it still rooted in first century Christianity at its base? Is it authentic? And he decided he was an Anglican. It's a good question. So he went and did the research, started reading the early church fathers. In the process of working on something he decided to write called the history or the development of Christian doctrine. Well, that was very dangerous for his Anglicanism, of course, because before he finished the book, he realized he could no longer remain as an Anglican, but had become an apostolic Christian. So he became Roman Catholic, his counterpart from Anglicanism. And but he's very famous for saying this: to know history is to cease being Protestant. To know history is to cease being Protestant. Once you know history, Protestantism it's not plausible. It doesn't work. It's not rational. It's not a thinking religion. We've had Bible studies on this and lectures, so we can't go into that. So, and there have been massive waves of Christians, and I'm getting to your question, Peter. Don't worry. This is I know we're going way back in the pole vault here. And massive waves of Christians, Protestants in particular, and their pastors who have moved in droves in the Scott Hahn movement, we'll say in general, into the Roman Catholic Church. You guys know Marcus Grodi, Jeff Cavins, you could just go on, thousands. The Coming Home Network is a big network. If you don't know anything about this, I highly recommend you go read Scott Hahn's conversion story, Rome Sweet Home, Jeff Cavins, Marcus Grodi stuff, amazing stuff. Okay. There have also been, maybe those, especially probably most who logged in tonight are from the Roman Catholic tradition. There has been a very similar wave. You say, well, where are the rest of them? Well, they're not all just sitting in their Protestant churches. There has been what's called the Peter Gilchrist movement. Peter Gilchrist, was a Scott Hahn counterpart and led a massive movement of, at this point, probably thousands of Protestant ministers in their congregations into the Orthodox Christian world. Either way, we're talking about apostolic Christianity. We can get into subtleties another time. This is nothing what we're doing tonight. But there is an interest, a very similar interest among Protestants in their experience, the liturgical experience, and even modern Christians will say, like you said, at a Roman Catholic parish, who are looking for something deeper, more traditional, looking for something that gives them some roots. And I applaud them. I understand them. I embrace them. But they're moving in the wrong direction in this, and I'll tell you why. And I think any Jewish historian would tell you this as well. That modern Jewish liturgical practices are not to be identified with first century Jewish practices. Again, ask any historian, any Jewish historian, they'll tell you this. First century Judaism, even their synagogue services, are part of a sacrificial religion of the first century. Post AD 70, and by the time we get to what's called the council, I'd say rather the school of Yamnia, a little town on the coast, not far from Jerusalem, you have the beginnings of what is called rabbinic Judaism, in which Judaism has to kind of rethink itself. It's spread out all over the Mediterranean. And a number of rabbis were gathered in Yamnia. They weren't allowed in Jerusalem anymore after the Romans conquered the place. a number of rabbis there said, look, we ain't get that temple back anytime soon. How do we continue to practice our religion without the temple? Christians think of Jews today and they think of rabbinic Judaism, but that's not first century Judaism. Anyone in the history of religion, any Jewish historian will tell you modern Judaism is a different animal than first century Judaism. That's a historical fact. It's a theological fact. The theology of rabbinic Judaism is different than first century Judaism. One is a sacrificial religion. Go read Leviticus. The other is a congregational religion that is built upon the reading of Torah as the replacement for the sacrificial system. That's a historical fact. And so what happens is rabbinic Judaism is a different stage of Judaism in the first century. So if you're going to go to a local synagogue, if you're going to do it, I'd say go to a conservative or Orthodox synagogue. I wouldn't go to a Reform synagogue to learn about the current form of, their understanding of Passover and that feast day, or go to your Jewish neighbor's house. Again, I go to an Orthodox or conservative house. The Orthodox wouldn't allow you there. The conservative might for the Passover. But sure, fine. But realize what you're doing is a study of a religion. You're not doing a study of first century Judaism. That is a historical fact. And anyone who wants to deny that needs to just go talk to a historian of religion, and especially a Jewish historian. They will tell you that. Go open up I got a whole stack on my own shelf of this stuff right now, and point shelves, books on these things. And so rabbinic Judaism is a different species of Judaism than first century Judaism. And it begins to develop in its own way, out of necessity. This is not a critique. The synagogue service itself develops dramatically in the first couple centuries after AD 70. And some of the things they're doing, and historians will tell you this, are in reaction against Christian services or in imitation of. Synagogue services over the next couple centuries after AD 70, after Yamnia, in the 90s, as they begin to develop, are in reaction against Christian services that are housed by Jews down the street, or in imitation of. And from a scholarly standpoint, you have to be very careful. When you see something going on in Jewish writings in, say, the 2nd or 3rd century, you might think that you're looking at something that might help you understand the New Testament. But in reality, you might be looking, and it might be the case, but you also might be looking at something that is in relationship to the New Testament, in reaction or development to. My dissertation was on John 19:34, one verse, you guys all know, blood and water. And the soldier pierced his side, out came blood and water. There is some very interesting rabbinic commentary on Moses striking the rock, in which blood and water come forth. Now, someone who doesn't know history would say, oh, that's what John's trying to say. And you know what? That might be. But it's also as likely that rabbinic text, which is dated to around 250, is in response to what John said. And so from a scholarly historical standpoint, you can't make that leap, because you're going to build a whole dissertation on something that is on faulty ground, sand, not on rock. Okay, so that's for someone else to write a dissertation on that particular topic. In fact, I recommended my dissertation to somebody go take that one on. Very interesting. Very interesting. The rabbinic writings as we know them, the rabbinic writings, Rabbi Yitzhak says to Rabbi Yaakov, why did Moses go up the mountain? Rabbi Moshe says, why was there a mountain? Okay, if you ever read the rabbinic writings, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so those writings, please note this, begin to be written down in AD 200. 200. 200. You got me on this one? 200. The rabbinic writings, the rabbinic collections, all that stuff you know of, the rabbi says, the first time those things, the records that we have, the Jews have and refer to, Rabbi Yitzhak says to Rabbi so-and-so, the first time those things were even written down were AD 200. You think of the formation of the New Testament and life of Jesus and that date. Does that mean that what it is inauthentic? No. But you certainly have to, from a historical and academic and scholarly standpoint, be very careful when you're comparing to Christian writings that predate it by a century or more. Right? Or less than that. You have to look at that and say, okay, well, what's developed? Are they in relationship? They might not be. Are they connected? Is John 19 in any way connected to Numbers, the commentary on Numbers from the rabbinic writings? Maybe, but maybe there's no relationship. If there is a relationship, which one's influencing which one? Well, is it an oral tradition that John knows of? It's certainly not the written stuff. So that's the kind of stuff we have to be careful. And that, Peter, is why I would say when you're talking about a modern Seder meal, first of all, I'd make sure you're in the hands of a good conservative Jewish family. But you also want to, before you go there, make sure you understand the Seder meal and its history. Seder just means ordered in Hebrew. Okay, it means that it's normal meals. You eat, kids, come, dinner's on the table. The Seder meal, that is the ordered meal. The Passover meal is a meal that has a certain order in which things are done and a certain reason, a certain why. Okay, so it's called the Seder, the ordered meal. And you attend one of these things, fine. But don't you think for 1 minute when you see a bone on a plate that somehow that prefigures the bones of Jesus or something, concocts something in your head. I remember some poor mother of a homeschooling mother who she was taking her kids regularly each year to a Seder meal down the street at her neighbor's house. And she had little pamphlets, and it was all about how the Christian faith fulfilled the Seder meal. And she showed it to me. She said, look, you're a biblical scholar. Check this out. Isn't it cool? Isaiah, John, Jeremiah, Paul. There's like all these click, 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 click. And I looked at it. I said, I understand your motivation, but your source is a bit off here. You want to understand first century Christianity and therefore understand your faith more? And you want to understand first century Judaism, understand your faith more? Then go do the real research. Don't go to some neighbor's house. Okay, that's like going to your Baptist congregation down the street and think you're looking at first century Christianity. Any Baptist minister who has left that movement will tell you very clearly, that's not it. So, modern Judaism, in whatever form you're talking about, any Jewish historian will tell you, is part of a long 2,000-year history that in so many ways begins, not at Sinai, but at Yamnia in the 90s. Modern rabbinic Judaism. That's a historical fact. Okay, Peter?
This is great. Thank you, Father. We'll try to get some more questions in here. Bryce, up on screen. Go ahead and unmute yourself there.
Hi, Father Sebastian. My question it's kind of my understanding before this talk that Messianic Judaism was basically kind of the same as the Jews for Jesus movement, where they were people who were Jews, raised that way, and they kind of started to study their faith more. They saw Jesus in the New Testament as a fulfillment, and they didn't want to completely leave their Judaism, so they kind of have found a way to try to be both at once. Should that be kind of distinguished between that and like a Hebrew roots movement, where it's like Protestants who are trying to reinvigorate it with Judaism? It seems like you're saying it's mostly that latter half than the first.
Well, Peter only gave me 1 hour here. So I had to figure out where we were going to start tonight. So I started just like, okay, Messianic Judaism, modern era, 60s to today kind of thing. But yes, there's an excellent point about a little history of this. How do we get to today? Why are we doing what we're doing today? Many historians would suggest that the modern Messianic Jewish movement is a product of course, a product of history, but a product of a number of events and things that have happened in the last century or two. And I could go on for, I mean, people bring up the Holocaust, people bring all sorts of things and Jewish sympathies and all that, whatever, but who knows on some of those. But historians will certainly point to the events over the last, say basically 1850s until 1950s of what you're talking about, in which modern Christians made a very concerted effort towards evangelizing Jews and tried to take on some Jewish customs and things like that, maybe to the degree that they found helpful, or allow Jewish customs as they converted these Jews as they found helpful. So in the most recent event, like I said, Jews for Jesus, things like that. So there are some of those organizations are still around that started back in like 1850. Some of them are still around today. There are Catholic, there are Protestant groups that are basically bent on converting Jews to Christianity. And that's their prime, and they'll do it different ways, different degrees. But the modern Messianic Judaism, while it may be the child of that in some ways, it is certainly a distinct event. Peter mentioned, or you, I can't remember at this point, the question of is Messianic Judaism a place, you were asking, I guess, a place for a convenient place for Jews to convert? And the answer is yes. I just recently, just a couple days ago, was talking to somebody about this, who knew someone who was a Jew, who still understands himself as a Jew, and suddenly decided they wanted to come to Jesus. And they found somehow a Messianic Jewish congregation, and it was a very easy transition. Understandably. Great. Wonderful. And so I'd say for those who are in Messianic congregations right now, Messianic Jewish congregations, if you want to call it, whatever it is, in various degrees, the spectrum, yes, you will find in some of these congregations a higher or lower percentage of Jews who have come to Jesus. And it is certainly a place where they can easily make that transition. That doesn't mean, therefore, that this is a thing that must or should exist, because the end never justifies the means, right? Okay, it's a basic principle. So just because something is good or works out well, by the way, let me just give an example. I think you guys heard this. I am speaking to you right now. I am an ordained presbyter of the Melkite Church. I have a Ph.D. in Biblical Studies, a master's in Theology, because Jehovah's Witnesses knocked on my door when I was in college and handed me a Watchtower magazine and woke me up. Saturday morning, I was probably hungover. Knock, knock, knock. I was in college pad, a bunch of guys, Jehovah's Witnesses. Talk to me, hand me a Watchtower. I walked in, look at this thing. Woo! I got scared. That began a process for me to start to read the Bible and do some research and learn my faith and what was going on and what is the history of Christianity, who are the Jehovah's Witnesses, and all this stuff. Does that mean, therefore, and I can tell you that was a moment that changed my life. We should be going out door to door, handing out Watchtowers then. No, right? I mean, obviously not, right, Maura? Okay, so I mean, the end never justifies the means. We got to think of these things logically, right? So what we need to be doing then is thinking about how we're practicing. And this is a little self-critique now. This is going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable. Get ready. If a Jew walks into your church on Sunday and does not feel like he's in apostolic Jewish Christianity, then there's a problem. Okay? What do you mean by that? Well, I'll give you a funny story. We were in our little Byzantine Ruthenian congregation in San Luis Obispo called St. Anne's. I was a little boy. Not a little boy, I was a teenager. And I remember we're having a service. It's in the evening, basically a Vesper service, singing the Psalms and this chant that is heavily Jewish sounding to anyone who would hear it. Like, whoa, that sounds Jewish, sounds Middle Eastern. Okay. And it was. It's ancient Christian chant. Visitor, a man and his daughter walk in the door, and they stand there in the congregation. They were there for a good 15, 20 minutes. Finally, I see the father say to the daughter something. He points to the door, and they quietly walk out the door. So I walked over to him. I said, "Hi, excuse me, you're new here? You're welcome to stay." He said, "Oh, I'm sorry. We got confused. We were looking for the synagogue next door, and we drove in the wrong driveway." It took him about 20 minutes to figure out he was in the wrong room. He probably heard the word Jesus, maybe saw a cross, and just kind of, okay, wait a minute. He was a Reformed Jew, so let's cut him some slack. But when he was sitting there, he's listening, he was hearing us singing the Psalms in ancient Christian chant. And he's hearing the Psalms. And for him, he's probably just thinking, okay, this Reformed congregation is meeting in some Christian church or something. Maybe that's why there's crosses and stuff on the walls. But for him, the liturgy he was experiencing was Jewish enough, probably much more for his Reformed background, that he was there for like, I don't know, 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, till he finally looked at his daughter and said, "Honey, I think we're in the wrong building." Okay, so I think we need to look at our modern Christian services. And I don't mean let's just like modify them and make them more Jewish. What I mean is, let's look back to first century Christianity. What did the first Christians sing in the morning when they woke up? What did they sing in the evening before they went to bed? They were psalms. How did they sing them? What did it sound like? How did it feel? How were their churches built? Did you know this, by the way? I've been to Israel, thank God, 4 times now with the Institute of Catholic Culture. And we go places no one else goes, of course. We get muddy. And one of the things I love to hear from the archaeologists and the tour guides is this. Sebastian, over there, by the way, there's another archaeological discovery. They just dug up another church or another synagogue. Listen. Oh, great. How'd they know which one it was? Oh, well, which way it points. Okay. All right. So in Israel, the archaeologists are digging up first century churches and synagogues and first century buildings, religious buildings. They all look the same. They have the same mosaics of biblical imagery on the floors and on the walls of what's left of the walls. The Garden of Eden, the crossing of the Red Sea with Moses, the giving of the manna, stuff like that. Now, if they see clearly a Christian image, they know it's a Christian building. But a lot of times they don't know. There's not enough left, but they'll see mosaics, biblical imagery, and it could be a Christian church or a Jewish synagogue somewhere in Galilee or wherever. Synagogue, church, whatever word you want, I don't care. Religious building. Do you know how they can distinguish it? Which way it points. That's it. If it points toward Jerusalem, they know it's a Jewish synagogue. If it points east toward the rising sun, they know it's a Christian church. That's it. That's all they got to go on. The church buildings were the same. Their decorations were the same, biblical imagery. If we could go back, historians of musicology would tell you this. Their chant was the same. Their psalms were the same. The songs they sang. We need to restore in churches wherever you are first century Christianity. And then we will see a growth of Christianity and the Christian faith like they had in the first century. Peter?
I love it.
Sorry,
Thank you. No, that's great. Maybe we can fit one more in here because we're running out of time. I'll group some of these together and kind of to follow on where you just left off. What do you think is it really that is attracting, like you said, a lot of Protestants, but people in general? What is it that is attracting them to Messianic Judaism specifically? Norman asks, is it indicative of a lack of coherent doctrine among the Protestant denominations? Are they searching for coherency of connection between Old and New Testament? James asks, is it sacramentality? Are they looking, especially regarding the Eucharist and Passover? What is it that you think is driving people? What's attracting them at the heart of this?
Peter, I love Q&A part because these are where I get to do the parts of my lecture I had to cut out because of time. So I just flipped my book on my notes here. Oh, thank God he asked that question. I wanted to cover that, but I didn't get time. Okay, so what is the appeal? So again, you look at these congregations, the vast majority statistically are former Protestants, or I could just say Protestants. Why say former, I guess. But if you ask the average Messianic Jew, you say, who and what were you? Were you a Jew in your background, or were you a Protestant Christian background? 75% of the average congregation, these things vary, easy 75% is going to be, they're going to say, I was a fill in blank, some form of Protestant. Okay, so now you have to say, what was the motivation, was the draw? I already talked a little bit about the Gilchrist-Hahn drive in that movement. But this is another movement. They're seeking for something more. There was a great book. Oh, Peter, you can find the link and tell me the author. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Evangelical is Not Enough. Well, I'm talking, find the author's name. I can't remember his name.
Thomas Howard.
Thomas Howard. Thank you, Peter. Thomas Howard. If you guys haven't read that book, you need to read it. Evangelical is Not Enough. It is one of the greatest books I've ever read. Thomas Howard. He talks about how being raised as an evangelical Protestant, how he began to yearn for something more substantial on Sundays. He didn't know what it was, but he was seeking something. And he eventually moved from evangelical, guitar, electric guitars and bands and stuff on Sundays to, I think it was Lutheran, maybe next. And then graduated in Lutheranism to a much more like Missouri Synod Lutheran kind of. Then eventually he graduated from there to Episcopalianism. Then from that, Anglicanism, High Anglicanism. I won't tell you how the book ends, but I think you know how it ends. I love the last page of the book. Okay, so anyway, Evangel is Not Enough. It's a great book because he just tells his story and he writes the story as he's going through the thing. It's just great. And he's just realizing that there's like this depravity of substance in his Sunday experience. And he's looking for something solid, something he can chew on, And so to answer your question, Peter, and I'll remember to end with a very interesting story that's connected to this. And that is that there is an appeal to some substance. And so a lot of evangelicals will stumble into one of these congregations, end up, a friend calls them, hey, my friend's a rabbi and a Christian rabbi, and they have services at their house. You want to come Sunday or Saturday? Yeah, okay. So they show up. A lot of times they're house churching, by the way. That's a whole nother conversation about house churching and how it's part of all this story. And how these guys become pastors. So they walk into these congregations and they immediately find customs, traditions that unite the community. Most of the men are wearing a yarmulke. Okay. I put a yarmulke on, I'm instantly connected to those guys. Most of the guys have beards. Okay, I start growing a beard, I'm instantly connected to these guys. Maybe it's a very conservative group of these. The women are wearing all head coverings. Okay, my wife puts on, we're in, right? There's a sense of community that you get there. And so because there's small groups, you get that immediately often, but also there's some little things you can do very quickly. And all of a sudden, boom, you are part of a community of people that are working together and doing something together. And that's really important. That is Christian. That's what we're missing in these mega churches. I I told you, we have one in the Eastern Church. You guys know I'm biased on these things. In the Eastern Church, we have one service on a Sunday. That's it. And if you need more room, that means go start another church for another group. Start a mission. You don't want more than 100 people on a Sunday, ideally, because you start losing people. The pastor doesn't know their name. He doesn't know what's going on in their lives. He can't talk to them on Sunday or a handshake out the door. Forget it. Ain't going to work. You got to have a congregation that comes together. Our church comes together. If you guys in the Bay Area, I invite you. People start showing up. The service starts at 10 o'clock. Orthros, morning prayer. All Psalms at 10 a.m. My wife and I and the kids, we get there at 9 o'clock at the latest to start getting everything ready. And other people show up to help us. 10 o'clock, we start Orthros. From 10 to 11 is morning prayer. As people are starting to show up, singing Psalms, beautiful chant. Ancient service, back to the first century. Then, actually back to time of Moses, actually. Then we start what people would call the Mass or the Divine Liturgy or the Sunday service. Because my homilies going so long, it usually takes about 2.5 hours. Then we have the agape meal. We have dinner, we have lunch together. People hang out and socialize. The service starts at 10 a.m. I'm kicking people out this Sunday. Was it Monday day? Yesterday. We got out of there on 5 p.m. and I was telling people, you lock up, I'm out of here. I got to go. I got my wife and kids home. Okay. That's what we need to restore in our churches on Sunday, is that community experience. And when you go to a small church community, I don't care what it is, a Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall, a Baptist service, a little Catholic church in the country, Orthodox, whatever, if it's small, you get that community sense. But when when a Protestant walks out of a mega church, evangelical mega church, they walk into a little church, little community, 5, 10, 20 people, Messianic Jewish congregation, and then they see some little customs that's uniting them, and they can easily start being united with that. That's very attractive, and for good reasons. We want to belong. We should belong. That idea that your pastor doesn't even know who you are, doesn't know your name if you saw him at the grocery store, that's insane. Maybe a whole study on that, Peter, but I'll probably get fired. Okay, and then furthermore, sense of community. And then finally, a sense of authenticity, right? You walk out of this mega church band service, and you walk into this little congregation in which they're singing, often with no instruments, and some of the words are Hebrew. The pastor's got a yarmulke on. There's a couple words in Hebrew. Maybe one of the hymns had a word or two in Hebrew. There's immediate connection to first century, right? Judaism. There it is. There's Judaism, and there's a feeling of being rooted. And that is, I think, a very good, I know that is a good feeling, a yearning that every Christian should have. But the problem is that they are not seeing first century Judaism nor first century Christianity. And they need to recognize that. And I'm not in any way critiquing those congregations, saying, hey, you're not good enough. No, everyone's in process here. Modern Christianity is in crisis right now. Modern Christianity, of whatever group or congregation or denomination someone's in, needs to get their eyes back on first century Christianity like a beacon in the darkness. And that will unite Christianity once again. Not you join me, we'll join you. I give up mine, you give up yours, and we'll come to it. No, we look at first century Christianity and how they did things and what they believed is the light that we all, or the umpire that we all have to agree on. Otherwise, just take your Bible and toss it, because this is a product of the first 3 centuries of Christianity in its organization and collection. And I'll end this, Peter, a little quick story on this, and you're going to kill me because it goes on too long. We had a little baptism. Tomas, my son, at a little church, little mission we had in Nebraska. The bishop came for the baptism. Very nice blessing. And a great deacon there, and we had a beautiful service. baptism as part of the Sunday service, which is early church stuff, always as part of the Sunday service, joining the congregation. And, but it wasn't fancy, guys. I'm telling you, it was not fancy. Well, two interesting conversations came out of that experience. There was a visiting professor at the seminary where I was teaching, who was a historian, a patristic and liturgical scholar, early church literature and liturgics. I asked him if he wanted to come for the Sunday service. He came. It was all done with the Sunday service. We all went down the basement to celebrate the baptism. As we do in our Eastern churches, the basement, we have a big party down there, everyone's eating, okay? About 15 minutes later, I went back upstairs to make sure the candles were blown out and things were cleaned up. And there he is standing in the church all by himself. And I asked him, "Are you okay, Doctor?" I'll leave it blank here for anonymity. "Oh, yes, Sebastian. Yes. Well, we're all downstairs. You're invited. Everyone goes to the baptismal party downstairs. Come eat." He said, "Oh, I'll be down there in a minute." Okay. Then he looked at me very sternly. He said, "Do you know what you just did today?" "We baptized a kid." He said, "Yeah, that was a 2nd century baptism." "Yeah, I know." He said, "No, you don't understand. I'm a patristics and liturgical scholar. I have been writing articles and books on 1st century Christian liturgical celebrations for my whole career. I didn't know you people still exist." That was the best compliment I ever got. The next one was I came down the stairs. I had invited a Protestant friend of mine who had a master's degree in biblical studies from Duke University and was working on his Ph.D. Really bright guy. We were really good friends. And I walked up to him. I went down the basement. I thought, well, I'll let that guy up there for you. I come downstairs and there's Jeff. And I said, "Jeff, how's it going?" He said, "Good, Sebastian." He's getting a cup of coffee. I said, "Hey, how'd you like service?" He's pouring the cup. "Can we talk later? I mean, not like right now. Maybe this week I'll call you. I'm not ready to talk right now." Okay. Wednesday, the phone rings. And this finishes the question that came up at the end here. Sebastian, this is Jeff. "Oh." So I reached into my holsters and made sure my apologetic 6-shooter ready. Okay, fully loaded. Let's go. "Yes, Jeff." I taught courses in apologetics. I was ready to go. "Yeah, Jeff, let's go. What's up? What is it?" And he said, "I have a question for you. I want you to be honest." "Yes." "Remember I told you I was going to call you and we're going to talk?" "Yes, Jeff." "Was what you guys did on Sunday what you do every Sunday?" "Yeah, I'm ready." I'm thinking repetition in prayer, something like that. I'm okay. "Call no man on earth your father," graven images. Who knows what he was thinking? I'm ready. I'm fully loaded. Okay. "Yes." He said, "Well, that's what I thought." Okay. Come on, let's go. I'm ready for you. And he said, and we were good friends, but we knew each other really well. We knew our backgrounds and everything. And again, this guy knew his Bible very, very well. And he said, "Well, Sebastian, we just can't compete." "What?" I said, "We can't compete." I put the guns back in the holsters. "What are you talking about, Jeff?" And he said, "Look, what do you mean about you do that every Sunday?" I said, "Well, it's basically 90% the same. I mean, the hymns, the songs, I mean, they change a little bit every 8 weeks. We have it's an 8-tone cycle of our chants. So there's a little variation there. And then of course the epistle, the gospel, the homily change because it's a 1-year cycle. But yeah, I mean, most of the service is basically memorized. That's why people don't even have books." Yeah. He said, well, look, when I go to church on Sunday, I'm going to experience liturgy. And I know what you're thinking. Protestants don't call it liturgy, but let's be honest, it is liturgy. Every church has liturgy. He said, so when I go to church on Sunday, what's happened is our pastor, former Monday, had been on vacation. He had his day off, which he's supposed to have the day off, didn't take calls. He just prays and thinks about his next Sunday's homily. And then on Tuesday, he gets in the office and he calls the music minister to let him know what the passage he's going to preach on. The music minister calls, whoever and so, and they start setting things up. Sunday morning comes and there's a liturgy. There is a liturgy there. We have our opening hymn. We have our whatever. We have this. We have that. It closes with a hymn. There's the homily. It's all structured. It's a liturgy. I said, yeah, Jeff, I've been to Protestant services. I know. He said, I know. I just want to make sure you understand. We don't call it liturgy in the evangelical church, but it is liturgy if we want to be honest about it. Okay, Jeff, what's up? What's going on? He said, well, I said, but you can't compete. Why, Jeff? What are you talking about? He said, what I experienced on a Sunday was created in 1 week. What I saw you people doing on Sunday, you've been working on for 2,000 years. There was a long pause. I wasn't sure what to say. I said, well, yeah, Jeff, that's what it's all about. Apostolic Christianity. We don't reinvent the wheel. We don't try and make something up to make look like what we think something looked like in the first century. We don't make something up, to get back to our topic, to what we think first century Judaism looked like. To make it look like what Jesus or the apostles, what we think they were doing. What we need to do is be real historians and really authentic and honest with ourselves and honest with God and the Holy Spirit, and go back and do real research. Go back and read the New Testament for real. The Acts of the Apostles for real. Maybe 5 times. And then read the Apostolic Fathers. Read the Christians who studied at the feet of the apostles. Ignatius of Antioch, for example. Barnabas. What did they say? What did they understand about what the apostles taught? And if someone thinks that somehow, well, we can't trust them, well, then you can't trust this, because they handed it to us and told us it was written by them. The Gospel of Matthew, there is no ancient manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew. The original one doesn't exist. The original manuscript of John doesn't exist. The original manuscript of all New Testament writings don't exist. There are copies of copies of copies by the first couple centuries of Christians. And some of these things from the New Testament is stuff you can't date it earlier than more like the 4th century. From a copy standpoint, a manuscript standpoint, you got to trust the guys that made those copies. And furthermore, how do you know Matthew wrote Matthew? Matthew didn't write Gospel according to Matthew and then start writing. A scribe put that up there because that was the Christian tradition that was written by Matthew. How do you know Matthew wrote Matthew? And if you don't know that Matthew wrote Matthew, except that some scribe a century later stuck it there on a manuscript, then how do you know that that's actually inspired or an apostolic writing? You don't know. If you're interested in being an apostolic Christian, if you're interested in your Bible, then you better know who the first couple Christian centuries were and who those guys' names were who made copies and put Gospel according to Matthew on the top of the text, because he heard from Grandpa that Matthew the Apostle wrote that. And that's the entire New Testament like that. Peter, I think we're probably out of time.
Father, could you close us in prayer this evening?
Heavenly King, Consoler, Spirit of Truth, present in all places and filling all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our souls, O good one. Amen.